Hello everybody, welcome back to my channel. This is Harika. So as a part of Web UI automation series, today I'm going to talk about few activities or few functions that we can perform on web automation. So first of all, as a part of that, as we are very much familiar with RPA challenge, so I'm going to RPA challenge under the shortest path. You can go to this particular form. Let me So under shortest path, you can see this particular form. Okay. So here you can just perform multiple actions like checkbox, radio buttons, and typing, and then also selecting here. So I have already also chosen an example for multiple select. So these are the various things that we are going to do in this video. So for that, what I'm going to do, we all are familiar with the open browser activity, right? So I'm just taking open browser, selecting the browser type to Chrome, and also I'm giving the URL that is pointing to RPA challenge. Okay, so we are clear with this, right? So after that, what I'm going to do, I'm going to pull a check activity into my workflow. Okay, so what this check activity actually does, it's gonna check the checkbox against urgent. Okay, so for that we have to take a selector. For that I'm indicating it. I want to check this one, right? So let's edit the selector. So if you see, I have already mentioned you in one of the videos how to stabilize the selector. So there I have said ID is one of the most stable attribute, but still if it is varying constantly, we have to check if it's gonna be stable or it's not, you know, a perfect thing to be in our selector. So for that I'm opening this in UI Explorer. So what you have to do is just go to your website, refresh the page, and go to your Explorer, and you can see this is in red mark. That means this is not a stable selector. So I'm going to delete this off, and I'm going to select some attribute which is constant all the time. So if you see here, I don't want ID, input, and checkbox. These both are fine, but I'm not going to take CSS as well. And name is something gibberish, which is not a urgent or something. So I cannot find anything which is relevant to my selector, right? So what I'm going to do, I'm just going to take only this part of the selector and then save. Okay, we have already seen an example like this where the selector is not constant all the time. So I'm just taking anchor base. So I'm going to refer this particular selector with the particular anchor. So we have seen what activity goes in the anchor place, right? So if you are not familiar with how to work with anchor base, I would suggest you go and watch the previous videos on anchor base. So that will give you enough familiarity about anchor base activity. So I'm going to take find element, pull this over here, indicate. So now what is my anchor? I wanted to check this checkbox, which is against urgent, right? So this is my anchor. After that, just edit selector, because all the time we have to make sure that the selector is stable. That is the main criteria in UI automation. Okay, so as I said you, if there is something of this sort, try to eliminate it with wildcards. So just I'm replacing this with one more wildcard and then validate. Okay, perfect. Say okay, and then drop this activity over here. Great. So that's all. And what is the one more thing that we have to do with anchor is go to properties, and we have to align the position of the anchor. So where exactly this anchor is? Urgent is the anchor, and this is my action. Okay, so anchor is towards the right. Okay, so what I have to do, go to here, the anchor position is right. So you can see This is my checkbox and this is my anchor. So this is aligned perfectly now. So now let's go and run this workflow, before to which I am just going to close it. And also one more thing you have to remember is we have to check this checkbox, go over here and make it as a complete, so that it will wait until the page gets completed. So we have seen everything in the previous videos, right? So I think by this time you're familiar why we are setting these properties. So we are good with this. Just debug the file. And we can see the checkbox got checked and the program execution has finished, right? This is so simple, right? And let's go into the check activity and try to see the properties of this. So if you see, there is something called as action, right? If you just see here, we have some three different options, which is check, uncheck and toggle. So what happens if I do a check? So let's say if I'm selecting check, whatever the action is happening, it's gonna go and check. So if I am changing this to edit selector, go to UI Explorer, or I already have something here. So instead of urgent, I'm going to take permit required. Okay. So we have seen permit required checkbox is always checked. Replace this with wildcard. This as well. And then say save. Oh, I think that's another UI element. It didn't get reflected. Okay, no problem. I'm going to select it. I'll just take this particular value and replace it. Okay. Say okay. Okay, now I'm going to run it. So as per my process, if I do a check is something that we have enabled here, right? So if I debug, it will go into the permit required and it has to check. But let's see what actually happens. I didn't kept a maximize window, so I am doing maximizing. I think click is not taken. Let's do one thing. Let's pull a maximize window. And now run this. Okay. Cool. Okay. This is not something that I wanted to highlight here. Let me show you one thing. So if you just observe here, let me put a breakpoint and then debug this file. Okay, step into. Let's go over here and check. So it has not checked the checkbox, because if it has checked, that has to be unchecked. So let's do one thing. So if you just observe here, it has we have selected the check, right? So let's give an uncheck. So what happens exactly if you give an uncheck is, so we have seen an example, right? The normal manual action, how the normal manual action happens and how the automation happens. So these are the two different flows that you have to keep it in your mind, right? So let's say if I give a check, okay, and if I click it again, in a manual action that will be unchecked, correct? But in the case of automation, we have different options wherein if you click on check, it will be, even though if you perform check on it 100 times also, it will be a check only. If you do on uncheck, it will be, even though if it's not selected, it will be an uncheck itself. So if you give a toggle, That means if you see, we have one more option, right? So which is a toggle. That means if it's already selected, it's gonna unselect it, right? If it's unselected, then it's gonna select it. So that's how it's gonna change. So let's try to replicate this. Now I will be doing an uncheck. Okay, so firstly I'll run it normally. So continue, right? Just go over here. If you see, it got unchecked. Perfect, right? And now I am going to run the process again. This time before the breakpoint. So this is not executed yet. I'm going to uncheck this manually. And then now the bot will perform the uncheck action on it, which should be uncheck itself, right? So let's say continue. Let's go here and see. So if you see, it still got unchecked, right? So that's how we can perform. So if you select a check option, it will be no matter what, even if the button is if the particular checkbox is selected or not, it would be selected. If it's an uncheck, even if it's selected or unselected, it would be unselected. So these two scenarios we have seen. So let's go into the toggle option and check how this actually works. So in this case, let's go to the first scenario, which is a normal one. So in the normal case, I'm going to give it give a continue. So we can see it's a checkbox, right? So it will, if in a toggle case, it has to be unchecked. I'm hitting continue. Perfect, right? So let's run this again. In this case, I would stop the execution and uncheck. So it has to be checked. So I would do uncheck and now continue. This has to be checked. So right, we have seen all the three different scenarios that we can do with respect to different actions that we can do with respect to a checkbox, right? This is perfect. And now let's see how we can perform the same thing with other activities. Okay, so let's go for a radio button. So for radio button, we just have a simple click, because radio button is not something that we can do a check or uncheck. Even though if you click on a selected radio button also, it would be selected. So let's indicate here. Okay, so if you see, id is varying all the time. We have seen how this was varying in the previous. So for that, you just have to take an anchor base in the same way how we have done earlier. Just pull an anchor base, and then this is the action. Click is an action, then find element. Okay, pull this find element here, and then take this flatbed. Okay, make it a star. Perfect, right? And now what we have to set, we have to set the position of the anchor. So anchor should be towards the right. So just go over here, go to properties, and then change this to right. Great. So this is done. And now just try to execute the workflow. Continue. This is perfect, right? So we have selected bit. So this is how we can perform check, uncheck, toggle, and selecting a radio button. I hope this video is useful for all of you. And if you find anything difficult, or if you wanted to ask me some questions on this particular scenarios, you can let me know in the comment section. And also do hit the like button if you like the content of the video. And also don't forget to subscribe to my channel. In the next video, I'm going to see you with how we can do a selection from a particular drop down, and if there is an option to do multiple selections, how we can do that, what are the activities and what are the different properties that we have. We'll explore everything around select and multiple select. So thank you so much for watching. Do subscribe to my channel.